We are a company that does regulatory consulting, so we've worked in this space for a number of years across a variety of different states, New York, New Jersey, Maryland. We have some lottery winners as well, so it's been great. So congratulations to those who've won, and good luck to those entering in the second round. So my name is Sherry Boudram. I'm the CEO and co-founder of CannDelta. Not here to do a pitch either, but just so you know who's speaking and why I have any business being up here speaking to you kind folks today. So if you want to advance the slide, or I can do it.
I got you.
Yeah. Okay, great. Oh, doesn't really show up as nice here. But what it does say is we're going to talk to you about everything you need to know about starting a cannabis business, specifically dispensary, and give you some tips that hopefully you could take back with you. I'll advance the slide.
We're going to make this available too as a downloadable video that you can check out, so that's why we're just setting up a camera here. So.
Okay, so just super quickly, so our focus is really licensing, operational support, so really operationalizing your business once you do get your license, and then the compliance piece, which is very important to keep your license once you do get it. So we've supported over 300 businesses, currently 150 of those being retail. So we have quite a depth and breadth of experience helping cannabis businesses over the period of time of our business. But ultimately, we work with great partners like COVA and Solink and Temecca, who are here today to really help support our clients, and so that they can really be a successful business owner, right? We want to empower you to be entrepreneurs, to run your business, and to be successful. So it's kind of, as you can see, it's a bit of a group effort, and the more knowledge you have, the better. Quickly, that's our team. We're made up of scientists, regulatory experts, business strategists, so we have quite a diverse group to help support our clients through the process. That's myself and Lucas. We both have PhDs in chemistry. We both worked in federal government in controlled substances and natural products. I specifically worked as a compliance enforcement inspector, so I've been really on the ground level seeing what compliance issues there are and how companies can really mitigate any of those risks. And from working in industries that are really nascent, oftentimes regulators really do understand that this is a learning process. It's a learning process for them as well. So they are looking to see that you are entering the industry with integrity, that you're forthcoming, and that you're really willing to be compliant and to make change and to learn, right? So that's kind of a good way to think about it, and they're not necessarily there to put down the hammer on you, but to make sure to really guide you through this process too. And it is a bit of a learning lesson as well. Go to the next slide here. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly start with just an overview, just to level set on what's going on here in Maryland with legalization. I know that Jeff touched on this a bit as well. November 8th, 2022, that's when the ballot passed for legalization. So now it's very exciting. We know this is going to happen now that we have legalized adult use cannabis. And then less than a year later, Governor Wes Moore signed the Cannabis Reform Act into law, and that's really what created the framework for adult use cannabis in Maryland. And at the same time, the commission that was overseeing the medical framework, revamped and changed its name to the Maryland Cannabis Administration, so it could also oversee the adult use as well. July 1st is a pretty notable date of last year, because that was the time when you can really purchase and possess cannabis for personal adult use. It became legal, and also the existing medical dispensaries were permitted to pay a conversion fee, and that was based on their total gross revenue, at 10% of their total gross revenue from the previous year. So that conversion fee that they had to spend to convert their medical license to allow them to do both medical and adult use was really based on their revenue. So it did actually vary quite a bit in what that fee was that they had to pay. And then in the fall, it was 10% of their total gross revenue from 2022.
The last thing you said that fee was something.
Oh, that was a conversion fee. So for those medical, business owners to convert to be able to sell adult use as well, So it wasn't just like a flat fee that they all had to pay.
Or you said it was based on their revenue?
It was based on their total revenue, yeah. And then in the fall of last year, we had the first round. I know, very exciting, a 30-day period, and that was open for social equity. And there was that component of having 65% ownership and control, and there were also some eligibility criteria, things like being in a disproportionately impacted area. So you had to qualify for one of those three eligibility criteria to be social equity. And then the draw recently happened in March. A total of 174 applicants were selected across micro and standard for growing, processing, and dispensary categories. And then, very exciting, the second round is, as we know, May is fast approaching. We haven't heard anything yet, so it is likely going to be June. The regulator in their legislation stipulates that they do need to notify 60 days prior to the applications being accepted. So if we count that 60 days, it actually takes us to June, so June is actually probably more realistic. And that's going to also include the on-site consumption licenses as part of that too. And just to give you some perspective on the opportunity, we do have sales data that the MCA has published based on what the medical, existing medical businesses are bringing in sales for medical and adult use, because now they're doing both, which is pretty neat to see, because you're seeing that flower is vastly outperforming, followed by vapes and edibles. So it kind of gives you an idea of like what you should be, what sales you're going to be bringing in from what you're selling, and how they're being grouped over time, and that's on a monthly basis. And this is aggregated monthly sales, so they've kind of looked at all of the business owners as a whole to get that data. Yeah, and adult use, again, is outperforming medical. So you're still seeing that people are going to the adult use more than the medical. There's obviously advantages for medical because the taxes are not as high as adult use and things like that. But as Chris was saying, you could go multiple times, right? Like every day, and it's fine. So you're seeing it's being represented in the data. And then in terms of, this is in terms of transactions, so transactions per month, and there's obviously more transactions for adult use. So you see people kind of going more often, so it's very representative in the data as well. Okay, so quickly on the license types, I know this is dispensary focused, but just so you have a broader knowledge of what all this means. So standard grower license is for cultivation, packaging, distribution to other licensees. Independent testing laboratories. You can operate between 10,000 square feet and 300,000 square feet of indoor canopy space. You do have, outdoor is permitted as well, but there's just a bit of an equivalency, because you could grow more outdoors in terms of square footage than indoor. Indoor is obviously more controlled, so there's less probably room for error and faulty crops. So they've accounted for that. And then standard processing, you can transform cannabis to other products, extracts, packaging, distribution to dispensaries and independent testing labs, and you can process more than 1,000 pounds of cannabis per year. So they're the larger scale license type. And then the standard dispensary, you could operate a physical store, you could acquire, possess, sell, or dispense cannabis products or related material, and you could do delivery of medical cannabis until June 30th, 2024. So they kind of gave that to allow for a transition period, but then after June 30th, 2024, you need to qualify in partnership with a micro. So you heard Chris talking a bit before about the micro license type. All right. And in order to, the micro is very specific to being able to deliver. So for now, the standards can do that, but then after June 30th, they need to partner with a micro dispensary to be able to deliver their product. And then the on-site consumption lounge. So you could do cannabis consumption on licensed premises. The establishment needs a local permit, so you have to make sure that the municipality is on board with that. No cultivation, processing, or serving infused foods. So it's, you're not going to be doing any of that. Cannot own other licenses. So it is very specific to that particular thing. They want it to be its own standalone license type. Yeah, so they can't own other licenses as part of that. Can change the location with approval and compliance, and the licenses are supposed to start in this round. And you can source from other licensed growers, processors, and standard dispensaries. So you could bring the product in from those other license holders, but you're not, serving for infuse or doing any other type of processing, further processing on that site. So people are really coming, they're buying essentially what you got from another license holder already in its finished form, and then they're consuming it on site. Yeah. Yes.
So you say you can source. So
Yes.
the consumption lounge, are you essentially going to be able to sell like a dispensary?
So that's what they're envisioning it to be. So that you can source it. So you're sourcing the finished product from a cultivator or processor. So if it's edibles or whatever, you bring it to your on-site consumption space, and then people come in and they purchase it and they can consume there. So, yeah. Sorry. So once so the on-site consumption lounge holder, they can source cannabis from the growers, the processors, and they could bring those products to their site, and dispensary owners too. They could bring it to their site, and then when the consumers come in or the patrons come in, they'll then consume those products. So they could purchase those and consume it on site. They can't make their own products, but they could procure it from other license holders. Yeah, so it's almost like a dispensary, but in a dispensary you can't consume. You can only purchase it, then walk out of the store.
So it's literally like a dispensary that you can consume.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
But you can't have a dispensary.
It's like a grocery store.
No.
You go there and you buy the
No, because then that's almost like counterintuitive, right? Yeah.
Right, so.
Yeah, it was like, yeah, exactly, like a monopoly.
like right now, maybe in the future.
Yeah, I mean, you could probably have one in close proximity.
Yeah, like my lounge could be next door.
Yeah, like they didn't restrict that per se, so you could probably
I can have the lounge.
do that. Yeah.
And they get it from us.
You can't, because if you have a lounge, you can't have a license. You can
Yeah, but somebody else. Yeah, exactly. You could have another partner.
Partner with another dispensary.
Yeah.
Purchase a building right next to them.
Yeah.
And be able to go into business together.
Yeah. The only other thing you'd have to check is that the municipality doesn't have create any restrictions against that, because the municipalities do have some say on the zoning, which they haven't been great at all formulating, but technically. Sorry? For that one, yes. And then the micro grower license, processor and dispensary, very similar in terms of activities, but the scale is different. So for a micro grower, you could grow only up to 10,000 square feet annually. Microprocessor up to 1,000 pounds annually, and then the micro dispensary is delivery only, so it's a delivery service only. They have no storefront, a maximum of 10 employees, delivered to private residences and medical facilities, and they do have an option to convert. So the regulator you have to submit some additional information, but they do let you convert and upgrade to a standard if that's what you want. Yeah, and the fees are here, and yeah, Jeff mentioned it as well. So $5,000 for the standard licenses, so standard grower, processor, dispensary, incubator space, and the on-site. So they're all $5,000. In the social equity round, they did give a discount, but this round is not really going to be social equity, so that's the pricing there. And then $1,000 for the micros. And then there's the annual licensing fee. Well, it's a 5-year period, but you got to pay it once you get licensed. So just to give you some visibility on the application process, so we did go through a first round. The legislation does have some of this as well laid out there, but we do know from the initial lottery portion, when you submit, you do need to provide some individual and entity information, provide an operating plan, a business plan, a diversity plan as part of that submission. In the first round was social equity, so they had to do a verification for that. And you don't need property, but you do need to select a region to be within, because it is a lottery, and the second round is also going to be a lottery, and it is a lottery that's regionally based. So you have to be specific there. And then there's a stipulation that the applicants can only submit 2 applications. They cannot be for the same license type, so you could submit like a micro grower and a retail as well. It's based on a pass-fail evaluation, so what they did basically is that they received all the applications. If you met those criteria, those initial key requirements, then they'll put you into the pool of pass or fail. And then they ran the lottery on all those who passed. Regionally based, as I mentioned, and then the selected applicants were contacted to submit some additional information prior to getting the conditional license, so they are kind of looking for some additional things before issuing officially the conditional license. So first round, there were 172, so 8 of those were micro dispensary and 68 were standard dispensaries. came out of that round.
That's a question about the lottery because I wasn't
Yeah.
familiar with it.
Yes.
You said the only way to acquire a license is to apply for the lottery.
Yes. Yeah.
So I got to be chosen.
Yes.
Earlier, that's the only way.
Yeah, it's a lottery.
This round. This round. This first.
Yeah.
Oh, the first round.
The second one's also lottery.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. So the first one was a lottery, but it was all social equity. But the second round is lottery, but it's going to be on a broader audience. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, so for those lottery winners, and again, this is good to see because, you know, if you make it to the next round, this will also be you. So they, you know, had to pay the licensing fee. That's something that they're going to have to do. The license does expire in 18 months. There is a possibility for a 6-month extension, but you have to make sure that you provide a rationale. So they want to see that you've tried, right? Like you've tried to secure a site, you know, you've tried to make some means of operationalizing your business, and then they're happy to extend the 6 months. And then some other parts that go into once you get the conditional license, they are asking for a supplemental application to kind of convert that over, where they go through the criminal history check, the financial backgrounds, they'll verify the supporting information that you submitted, disclosures. You obviously have to demonstrate site control at that point because you do need a site. Register your business, develop floor plans, security plans, have your operating plans and SOPs. So at that point you're operationalizing your business. Yes, please go ahead.
Equity background check, how is that different from this current criminal background check?
So criminal background check is, really if you've had any criminal activities, right? Like if you have any charges. The social equity verifications, they're checking to see if you're in a disproportionately impacted area. So that was one of the criteria, that you've lived in a disproportionately impacted area for 5 out of the 10 years, that you've gone to a public school that is in a disproportional area for 5 years, a minimum of 5 years, and then, yeah. So like that was a social equity verification. But then the criminal record check is really your fingerprints. They want to make sure that you don't have any criminal background. And then the second round. So the second round, there was some discussion around, so it's supposed to be an open lottery, but there was some discussion around having the micro businesses dedicated to social equity. That's really going to be decided based on the MCA's disparity study. So they're going to look at to see, how many social equity applicants are there, how many are successful, and kind of see if they need to better accommodate that group. And then these are the numbers that, are looking to be awarded licenses. This is the maximum, so they obviously don't need to hit that number. They could do less. That's within their right to do that, but that's the numbers that they're aiming for. So based on the way that this lottery process has gone, we can kind of see maybe being awarded September, maybe even October, by the time that lottery goes through. And just quickly before I turn it over to Lucas, so the application is one part of it. The regulator does ask for additional documents, and really just to operate your business to be compliant, it's important that you have all of these. These are just a few of the key components that kind of go into operationalizing and going through your application. The plans I talked about that were in the legislation, and then looking at the sites to make sure that they're suitable, having your facility floor plan designs, SOPs. There's a few different plans that they're looking for in your inventory tracking. So, quite a few things to consider. To submit a winning application, that's what everybody wants to know, I think, at this point. But just some very basic criteria that is easily achievable, meeting the minimum qualification for the lottery. I mean, you'd be surprised that it sounds easy, but there are obviously people who got screened out, right, because it wasn't even hitting that minimum. They might have just missed some things. Make sure the application is accurately represented and truthful. The application limits are respected, so the number of licenses that you could submit for a particular license type, which I mentioned, so you could submit 2 applications, but it can't be of the same license type. Submit on the deadline, and then if the MCA does ask you any questions, make sure to respond. You'd be surprised how many clients, prospects, individuals we've spoken to that don't check their emails, or could go into spam. It's super important. just to be on top of that. And then of course, get the support that you need early. So I mean, give yourselves a pat on the back for being here, you know, earlier in the process, especially if you're looking to enter into the second round, because, you know, it's important to, you know, get the network and know what you need to do before going into it, because it is, you know, a pretty big endeavor. So start early. And I'll turn it over to Lucas. Any questions about that portion? That was just the legislation sort of overview, and then Lucas is going to talk more about, I guess, starting the business, right?
Yeah, sure.
Yes, in the back.
This first round,
Yes. Yes, there were
And successful.
successful companies, yeah, that actually won the lottery, so, yes.
All right, cool. So that handsome devil's yours truly. I'm Lucas. I'm the CSO of CannDelta. I've been working underneath Sherry for about 6 years. These events are great. I love the opportunity here. There's so much knowledge in this room right now, from lessons learned. Goes back to, I think, maybe the first time that I actually met Gary from COVA. It was 2019, Holiday Inn in Toronto. And you know, we had just sort of showed up just looking to network, meet with folks, and sort of get plugged in. Gary put on a great, you know, educational show for the group that was there. And since then, they've been a trusted partner for us. I mean, we're typically an initial touch point for a lot of folks, because we'll typically sort of be that first point of contact when people are thinking about it. And then a lot of the folks we work with have graduated and gone on to work with COVA and a lot of the other folks who are going to be speaking here today, SoulLink, Kaya Push, Tameka Group. So it's just, if you have questions, this is really the place to get them out. There is so much knowledge, lessons learned, like I said, about what to do, and certainly what not to do, which I'll focus a little bit on in my presentation today. I went to school for a really long time. I really wanted those 3 letters at the end of my name. And I went to the federal government after graduating from school and worked in controlled substances for a while. But really saw a great opportunity here to help folks with applications, because it was so difficult. And you know, I've really found, I think my passion in life is helping folks move through the process of, for example, you know, getting licenses or getting set up. So very much consider myself a small business consultant. Some of these slides, the pieces sort of didn't copy. I guess they probably matched the formatting for what they were going into. So there's a part here, it's like, why is this a great time to go into cannabis? So just imagine that here on this side, okay? And the reason is, and I got 2 great reasons why to consider. One, we've all heard about the Department of Health and Human Services is considering and has been considering and talking about what it would look like to reschedule cannabis from Schedule 1, which is where it's now sitting, next to drugs like heroin, right, to Schedule 3, which has some medicinal value, right? And I think anyone in this room probably knows someone, if not themselves, who has benefited from the medicine that is cannabis. Right? So to have it sitting next to something that has only really caused harm to society is kind of ludicrous, and this will have long-lasting impacts, I think, that would benefit the industry well beyond sort of what's happening here in the state. It would have, I think, some big national impacts. And further to that point, safer banking. I know this has been a long time coming. We have been talking about it. This could pass sometime in the near future, and probably, hopefully, before federal legalization happens. And again, this would allow for example, the only 10% of US banks or 5% of credit unions in the country who are able to handle cannabis to expand a lot of those scopes of services and expand the range of banks that would be able to work with cannabis businesses. And right now it is tough. We're not a plant touching company. We've had our bank account shut down. We've had our Google Ads account shut down. So, you know, even just being associated to the word is enough to get you in trouble with Google, Facebook, the banks, the feds, everyone. So tread lightly. Gary showed this slide a moment ago. We're really going to be focusing on that top bar there, our 33%, you know, the cost of compliance. It's really one of those things that, like, you know, pay now or pay later, unfortunately. And it's something that if you put a little bit of work into it early on, be aware of what that looks like, can save you a lot of headache down the way. And I know what it's like to run a small business. I understand that everything's very, very costly and expensive. And as a bootstrapped individual, you're probably looking for every single corner you can cut. Honestly, you just need to get it done, and get it done as cheap as possible. But really, we have to be thinking about sustainability. We have to be thinking about that long-term vision. Because, you know, a 3,000 square foot retail dispensary without a license attached to it, it's really not worth too much. Except for maybe $10,000 a month in lease costs that, you know, aren't driving any revenue. So let's think about compliance as we're going through the day today, right? You know, if we think about the other substances out there, we have our tobacco, our alcohol, controlled substances, and then cannabis is kind of like way up top there, right? So, as it should be, because it's obviously very dangerous. Millions of people die every year from cannabis exposure. We've seen a lot. We've done every license type. The outdoor cultivation is certainly a fun one to put together. We took a drone over this field and flew it around, and it was just really something to see. Cannabis as far as the eyes could see in all directions. We've helped set up the greenhouses, and you know, with my background in chemistry, I definitely get to flex that muscle when it comes to, for example, helping folks sort of set up and plan what facilities would look like on the inside, you know, with certain kinds of paneling, build advice on construction. And one thing that's going to be really important to think about for all those on the production side is what GMP is going to look like. GMP is the standard that production has to be held to for folks to be able to play in the international market when federal legalization happens, right? And that's something we want to be thinking about. Yeah, absolutely. Yep, so there's aquaponics, hydroponics, aeroponics, which, oh, absolutely. Yep, that's some of the most dialed in way. It can be some of the more risky ways. So if we want to talk about sort of cultivation plans, happy to speak to that. But you know, if you're growing in pots, very quickly, that's a very isolated system. When you're growing in a hydroponic system, everything is talking, right? So if one batch of fertigation or fertilizer, the mixture is off, that whole row, that whole room, that whole facility can go down. So it's really something you got to dial in. We've done GMP, good manufacturing practices. So we have been able to ship cannabis all across the world legally through medical markets by ensuring that the cannabis that we have shipped through places like Canada, Germany, Israel, France, Australia has met a certain level of compliance. If we look at sort of the food sector, a lot of those standards are borrowed from food and pharmaceutical manufacturing in terms of clean rooms, gowning rooms, airflow, right? We have all these very, very high standards that when we get to a retail dispensary, I think we tend to throw a lot of that out. But it's kind of still important because we're still carrying the products in those rooms. We want to make sure those products don't spoil when they're sitting in our secure storage, right? So things like HVAC considerations. What is the humidity? And how are we maintaining and monitoring the humidity in that room? Those are all super important things to consider when setting up a secure storage room, because you don't want to be the plug on the street who's selling the dry weed, right? People will get wise to that. ISO is an international standard. It's similar, but different. It's along the same vein. GMP has to do with the building, the people, and the processes. ISO is a lot more about, I would say, the processes and maybe sometimes the equipment, but GMP kind of pulls that all together.
Yeah, so GMP is good manufacturing practices. It's largely used in pharmaceutical and food industry, and it's really just to make sure that the product that you're making has a set quality standard so that it's robust and reproducible every single time. Right? So it's like when you get Tylenol, if you buy Tylenol anywhere in the world, it should be the same, right? So it's kind of like the same concept. Yeah, so they want that.
So all this to say that we put these things together, but something we have a lot of joy and pleasure in is putting together the adult use retail dispensary. It is so much fun to do. It's a very slimmed down, short project. It's normally a much smaller footprint. And we take a lot of those practices we've seen in sort of those other parts of the industry and apply it in a very fun way at the retail dispensary, because that's where we actually get to interact with the consumers, the clients, the customers who are coming in, and create those relationships directly, right? And you're creating those relationships almost on the part of the processors and the cultivators. So it's sort of a big responsibility there to be able to display their products and talk about their products in a way in which you're knowledgeable and in a way that's also compliant. You know, a great question we get all the time is like, what do I do if someone comes in and they say they have, for example, a bad back? Right? Or what about a pregnant woman who's looking to ease her morning sickness? Now we have to remember here that we're not medical practitioners, we're not practicing doctors, so we have to be very careful when walking the line about making claims. So, I usually recommend You know, I can't answer that exactly for you, but have you seen our CBD topical area? You know, even saying, I've heard that some folks have success with, walks that line of making a claim with cannabis products. So you want to be very, very careful, let your staff know that beyond just, you know, having a guy walk an ounce of weed out to his car, also how you recommend products and how you lead the customer to the right product is something that could be under the magnifying glass. We've worked with a lot of folks who have converted their CBD or hemp store into a retail dispensary. That's a lot of fun. Typically, the CBD stores don't do as well as a cannabis retail dispensary, so it's a lot more fun. We've also worked with a lot of folks who've been kind of doing the THC thing under the table while they're waiting for their license to go. So don't tell me if you are, but these are sort of a great model for folks who have, I'd say, a really good amount of experience to be able to come into this space and do really, really well. Question at the back.
Have you seen any instances where a dispensary is open and one of the owners is a licensed provider who can dispense?
There are certain models, yes, that have even operated like consumption spaces or consumption lounges in which there are consultations that can happen. This can be, for instance, part of an event, or it could be, for instance, someone who is a staffer, but that's something that I would definitely check in with a regulatory consultant on to make sure you're not passing, you know, any lines, and just the way that that information is presented. Yeah. So it's going to be a little bit more complicated than just a yes or no, but sort of how you operate and how you communicate that information to your customers is going to be what makes that compliant or non-compliant. If you have a question about it, just find us at the break. We'll chat about it for sure. I don't even remember what this said here, but okay, onto that's okay. That's okay. Choosing compliant locations is super important. You want to make sure that, for example, you get a lot of exposure, foot traffic, but most importantly, you have a letter from the community board or from the municipality that says you're okay to operate there and that you're not going to have any issues, you know, once you get your license. We always like to get everything in writing. Strongly recommend that. We've seen folks, for instance, who sign leases without an exit clause and didn't win in a lottery system. This happened just up the street over in New York. You had to submit property to get your non-provisional, your full license in your application in a lottery round, which is really scary. How are we doing for time? Are we to 45? Yeah. Okay, perfect. Okay. So physical design or physical security principles. We have Solink here, who's a great partner of ours. They have an amazing technology. What we've been doing is we've sort of been working as sort of a green tax sniffer with a lot of folks when helping to set these things up. But it's all based around these principles of deter, detect, deny, delay, defend. These are the layers of security protection that you want to establish between, let's say, your secure storage room and the outside of your store. And whenever looking at physical security, we're always sort of putting it through this lens, right? Deter, for example, maybe not having sight lines in through a front glass window, or an alarm sticker on a door can be enough to act as that deter. And then detect, early intrusion detection, includes motion detectors, door contacts, glass break detectors, even cameras with integrated motions as well are something to consider when setting that up. We've worked with a lot of CBD stores to help sort of like, I guess, modernize what they have, because these folks are necessarily required to have, you know, the security system, but it's extremely prescriptive for physical security for a retail dispensary, especially in Maryland. There's a lot that you need to really have in place there, all the way down from frames per second to retention to the pixel density of the images that you have both outside and inside the store. That you'll want to make sure that, one, you have enough cameras, but two, you also don't have too many cameras, because you have to store all that information for what's called your retention time, right? And, you know, more cameras than you need can be very, very expensive on server capacity, right? A server capacity could go anywhere, could get you anywhere from, let's say, maybe a $10,000 bill all the way up to $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 just for a server alone to store your visual surveillance. That's a lot. For most folks, that's the biggest line item on their build out, is the physical security. That doesn't include the cameras or the motion detectors. So, you know, having a smart layout is super important. This one back here was a cultivator. These guys are typically in the $150,000 range to $200,000 range. A little bit less here, maybe about half that for a processor. Luckily, the retail dispensaries, in terms of like where they're at from I would say sort of a typical build, is usually a fraction of what you're looking at these large cultivators. Thank goodness, right? And we do see a lot of these also sort of sandwiched in between other businesses, right? So usually that helps to provide a couple of demising walls that sort of have that are acting as partitions and allow some kind of protection. But even looking at how that's being demised is certainly a big consideration, right? If you just have it as a drywall partition, sort of just a regular demising wall, then it's not uncommon for folks to break into the neighbors, kick a hole through the wall, and just walk into your store. So in Maryland, for a lot of the exterior doors, this is something simple that we would recommend. This kind of setup here where you have a door contact, maybe an electric piezo alarm, all feeding into a junction box. So as soon as this door opens up, that lets the door contact know that someone has opened this door when the system's armed. That rings the alarm because it says this door has been forced or this lock's been broken, and that contact's been broken. Thinking about people flow and process flow is a really, really important part of how the store needs to operate. You know, we really think about this from a compliance and an operational perspective. Whereas if you want something like this to really look pretty, you know, you can go talk to our partners who are here, Temecula Groups over there. Chris will be very happy to talk to you about how to make sort of what we would recommend from a compliance perspective look amazing, right? Make it look like people want to spend money there. But in most cases, we're typically working with some kind of client-facing area, a sales floor, and then a staff-only area, and then in the center of that, typically a secure storage area, right? And the secure storage area build-outs are going to vary state to state. And in Maryland, they're pretty high. So typically for a demising wall for a secure storage area, you have to have concrete. We've walked through 2-story vaults inside cultivation facilities in jurisdictions where 3 years later, the requirement for a vault went down to reinforced walls, which then went down to drywall with a motion detector and a camera. So unfortunately, it might not always be concrete or concrete-like material on your demising wall. But for the folks who are operationalizing now, it's going to have to be. You'll want to consider a few things throughout the store. I really love the idea of having a secure storage directly behind your point of sale. And I like that because it gives you the opportunity to have someone inside the secure storage who's one sort of keeping an eye on the store through a central viewing station, watching all the cameras, watching people come in and out. And people don't really notice that person, right? And then they're picking orders as things are sort of, you know, coming up through the point of sale and putting that through what's like a pass-through. So it's almost like a hole in the wall that doesn't really offer a straight sight line into the back, so you don't really see where the products are sitting if you're just a customer walking in. Exactly. And you are required to have panic buttons throughout your store, and a great place to have one is where someone would be watching on the central viewing station. Cameras around point of sale is going to be really important to consider. Depending on sort of your layout, things like fixtures, lighting, that's going to really have a big impact on where those cameras lay out, right? So if we look here at these lamps, for instance, if we had hung one of those lamps in front of that dome-style camera just above the till there, you'd have to hire a security guy to come back in and move that camera, 3 feet over one direction, right? Which is going to change your sight line. So having the understanding of what the design's going to is super important. So really working with the design build company and sort of bringing in sort of the physical security around the same time is ultimately going to help to make sure that we're not putting in more cameras than we need, and the cameras that we are putting in typically are going to do their job. Whenever you put in one dome camera, you typically need another one. It's got to be sort of equal and opposite to the first one you put in, because every time you have a dome camera on the wall, you're going to have a blind spot directly underneath that. So if someone stands underneath that camera, it's right above me, then you need another camera somewhere else in the room to be able to do that. Alternatively, we have things like 360-degree fisheye cameras, which capture an uninterrupted image of everything in the room. But those can be really hard to read, the resolution's lower, so typically you have to have a balance that works out with what you actually have set up for display cases in the store versus what your camera layout's going to look like. Sample display case here, similar to what we'd see in a jewelry store. It's tempered glass, very, very thick glass as well, would prevent any kind of breakage. And we do have products that are stored in locked drawers beneath those, but most of your product's going to be in the secure storage. And then here's an example of, for instance, a manager's or security office, sort of labeled in the back here, central viewing station, and a little safe drop for cash here. This particular safe is available through Brinks Security, and as soon as you drop the cash into that safe, it's in your bank. They just come by once a week and pick up the cash, but it's considered in the bank as soon as it hits that safe. Best $600 a month you can spend. And last thing on the secure storage piece is it's going to be super important to make sure that you are doing access control through some kind of card reader, because you do have to make sure that you are monitoring who's going in and out of that secure storage room. 90% of the time, if you are going to be experiencing theft, it's going to be internal. So we have something called the rights of least privilege, making sure that only folks whose job requirements make them have to access that room are actually able to do so. And we can do that through a two-factor identification, a card swipe, and a unique 4-digit PIN to make sure if someone finds something in the parking lot, they can't gain access all the way to your products. Cool, so I've got some extra stuff here we didn't have time to go through, but we'll be here at the back all day. So if you have questions, come and find us at the break. We'd love to chat with you. We've got lots of information in the back, and please be sure to chat with all our partners here. Turn it back over to you, Gary.
Good job.